Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we get into the schedule release of one key matchup for the Birds week 2. Also, I ask some key roster questions for the 2022 season. Who's the best player on the Eagles this year? Who are the key additions? The surprise player of the year, the most underrated? We get into all of that and more on this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Monday edition of the show. And today's podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. I'm Louis DiBiase. Thanks so much for tuning in to this first episode of 5. Download it into your phone wherever you get the podcast. We're also in video form as well on YouTube. And make sure you hit us up on Twitter at LockedOnBirds and at DiBiase LOE. It's really an exciting week. It's kind of the last real week with significant news across the NFL as the NFL's schedule is set to release officially the full slate of games on Thursday night. But again, the NFL likes to drag things out, as you've seen with the NFL draft. They like to theatricize. Is that a real word? They like to make theater out of all of their events, which, I personally love because I eat all of it up. The Senior Bowl, heck, even the NFL Combine and Pro Days and the NFL Draft, of course. And the schedule release, I think, is a really fun part of the offseason. And then again, it's kind of the dead zone of the offseason with a couple months here in between training camp and the draft. And so we have the schedule released on Thursday. Gino and I will have our reactions podcast right after the schedule comes out. So again, make sure you subscribe to the show. Really excited for that. But again, the NFL drags things out. And within each day over the next 3 days, ESPN, CBS, NBC, Fox, they're going to leak a few of their matchups. And today, this morning, the Eagles were one of the matchups that were leaked by ESPN on Monday Night Football. It's been announced that the Eagles will play the Minnesota Vikings on week 2 at Lincoln Financial Field on Monday Night Football. Only one Monday night game they had last year, that week 2 blowout against the Dallas Cowboys. And this game is going to be the home opener. So it's been confirmed that the Eagles will start the season on the road for the 3rd year in a row, starting last year in Atlanta and the year before in Washington. So week 2, that's the first matchup we know about the Eagles 2022 schedule against Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson in the Minnesota Vikings. I'm sure Jalen Reagor is going to love the talking points about that week. First time they played Justin Jefferson, who they took Reagor over. Jefferson is a top 5, top 7 receiver in the NFL. And Jalen Reagor is the 5th receiver currently on the depth chart behind DeVonta Smith, A.J. Brown, Quez Watkins, and Zach Pascal. So good thing Rager's off social media now because there's going to be a lot of talk about that throughout the week. I can't imagine we'll be that upset about playing Jefferson considering, probably wish they would have took him at that time, but you've done an incredible, as Howie Roseman always does. He did a great job of cleaning up that mess and the J.J. Arcega-Whiteside pick the year before, replacing those two supposed to be core pieces at receiver with DeVonta Smith and A.J. Brown the following 2 off seasons. So can't imagine anybody but Jalen Reagor is going to be too upset about the Justin Jefferson storyline in that game. But it will be an interesting game. Like week 2, they're very similar teams, right? Minnesota and Philadelphia, I would say really good rosters that if they had an elite quarterback, you'd say are 2 of the best teams in the conference, right? I mean, look at Minnesota's group of weapons. They've got Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, with that defense as well, a lot of key pieces. The Eagles, we see the same thing. A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, and Miles Sanders, a great offensive line, a bunch of new pieces on defense. It just goes to show that great rosters with good quarterbacks don't always make the quarterbacks great. I mean, great situations don't always elevate average quarterbacks. You've seen that with a lot of teams, including Minnesota. So Jalen Hurts still has a chance to take that step. But again, that is, proof that just because the Eagles added all these pieces doesn't mean Jalen doesn't need to make necessary improvements on his own that really had nothing to do with the weapons around him. I can't believe Minnesota double down on Kirk. Like, that is my ultimate fear, is exactly what is happening in Minnesota, where they keep getting to a certain floor where they're winning like 7 to 9 games. They make the playoffs every couple years, or they just come so close, like last year where the Eagles beat them out for a wild card spot, and 2018 as well. But again, you're putting up numbers with Kirk Cousins. He's throwing for over 4,000 passing yards. You got weapons, and you're just like, we don't want to really change this up. And you keep hoping he takes that next step. But the guy's been in the NFL since 2012. Again, sometimes, weapons can't elevate a quarterback. They can to a certain degree, but it's got to be the other way around. Quarterbacks got to elevate the offense. And so hopefully the Eagles and Jalen Hurts do not suffer the same fate of what we've seen in Minnesota, and they just doubled down, giving him another contract. Minnesota is my ultimate fear when it comes to roster building in the NFL. So it'll be an exciting week to talk about that matchup for sure. We'll have other matchups, I'm sure, leaked within the next 2 days, and then the schedule does officially release on Thursday. But for today's show, though, again, we'll get into the schedule more later in the week. I saw some Eagles fans playing this game on Twitter where they asked 6 key questions about the Eagles roster in 2022. Who's the best player? Who is the most underrated this year? Who are going to be the biggest key additions? Who could make the biggest leap? Who could surprise you the most? The make or break season. We'll get into all of that and more. I want to dive into that game coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. And guys, today's show, it's sponsored by Bet Online, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Bet Online is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including the NBA playoffs going on right now. Some crazy games. The Phoenix Suns now dropped the last 2. Dallas is tied up at 2. Philadelphia won back-to-back with a big win last night against the Miami Heat. Don't know why I'm forgetting the 1 seed, probably because they don't have any true stars on their team, and the Sixers do. 2-2 series in those conferences, a great series in Memphis and Golden State. Bet on all of the NBA action, the NHL playoffs as well, and the MLB at Bet Online. They're your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today, betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action, because BetOnline, it's where the game starts. All right, Eagles fans, welcome back into this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast for 5 shows a week, even after this week when the schedule is released and there really is no more NFL news. We are still going to be a jam-packed show for you Monday through Friday. So again, on today's edition of the show, I want to dive into a fun exercise I saw Eagles fans taking part in on Twitter, where they asked 6 key questions about the roster. Now that we really know pretty much everything there is to know about who this 2022 team is going to be on paper, of course, they can still bring in another cornerback and a safety, which I think they need to desperately bring in at least one more defensive back. Maybe that is James Bradberry when the Giants inevitably do release him. Maybe it's somebody like Kevin King. I don't know. Maybe you find a way to pull one of those Baltimore defensive backs from that depth chart. It's so deep. They said they're not going to trade anybody right now, but maybe you explore trade options. You could use another defensive back, but for the most part, after the draft now, this Eagles team looks pretty set. So some fans were asking key questions like, who's the best player on the roster this year? Who is the most underappreciated / undervalued? And who can make the biggest leap this year? Who could be the biggest surprise? Who is in a much needed make or break season? I want to get into those questions. I thought it was a really interesting exercise. And I want to start with best player. Best player was really interesting because now when you look across the team after this past month, like you combine free agency and the draft, they added some players that I think are going to easily be top 5, top 7 players on this roster. Hassan Riddick in free agency has been one of the most productive pass rushers in the NFL since 2020. You bring in A.J. Brown, one of the best young receivers in the NFL at 24 years old, over 1,000 yards in back-to-back years, almost 900 last year in an injury-rattled season. So you got A.J. Brown, Hassan Riddick. I do think as well, you have a lot of guys coming back, like Brandon Graham has been the heartbeat of your defense for a long time. Darius Slay is coming off maybe the best season of his career. Definitely better in Philadelphia in 2021 than 2022. One of PFF's top graded corners last season. You got the offensive line too. You look at, right? Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, one of the best left tackles in football already in just his second full season as a starter at 25 years old. But honestly, guys, I think the best player on this team, it's still Jason Kelce. I really do think it is still Jason Kelce. And, he's 34 years old. And you look at, it's probably going to be his final season with the Eagles. And a lot of times when you say that about a player, even a former star of your team, it normally means they're on their last legs. Like they've, reduced their roles as, more role players. Like the Eagles tried to move Jason Peters to guard in 2020. But to me, Jason Kelce, like I named him the MVP of the 2021 season. And although he wants to retire, that's really on his own terms. Like Philadelphia didn't want to push him out the door. And yeah, they've drafted his inevitable replacement in back-to-back years, Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens. But if Jason Kelce told them like last year or 2 years ago that he still wants to play for another 4 to 5 years, they weren't going to draft Dickerson or Jurgens, or at least I don't think they would have. So Kelce might be retiring soon, but that's not because of his ability. Last year, he's still a top 2 center in the NFL. I still think he's the best center in football. I mean, you still saw him getting 2 and 3 levels down the field in the run game, just destroying linebackers, defensive backs, offensive or defensive linemen. Jason Kelce, to me, is still, I think, the best player on the Eagles. I really do. And that's impressive. And it's why it sucks that, and it's understandable why he's mulling retirement. But, the Eagles eventually, it's going to be a sad day when they lose Jason Kelce because he is still at the height of his powers. And when you have that kind of guy in the middle of your offense, it makes everything easier. It really does truly elevate your offense for sure. I want to get into now the most underrated players of 2022. And this one's interesting. I picked 2 guys here. It's Quez Watkins on offense and then Josh Sweat on defense. And when you look at Quez Watkins, now it's going to be even harder for him to get targets because they did add A.J. Brown. You want DeVonta Smith to get more involved. Last year, he broke the single-season rookie receiving yard record. He broke Deshaun Jackson's record by 4 yards, going from 912 with D-Jax in 2008 to 916 with DeVonta last year. You want DeVonta to take another step. You want Dallas Goedert more involved. Miles Sanders hopefully stays healthy. You got Kenneth Gainwell. There's a lot of mouths to feed on this offense, and Zach Pascal is coming into the play as well. But Quez Watkins, to me, less attention is going to be on him. Hopefully he can get more involved now in the screen game with Jalen Reagor, not trying to be force-fed like he was last year, just to get him involved at all. And hopefully with the increase in the passing volume as well, it does kind of offset how many weapons are in front of Quez. Because last year, when you look at the first half of the season, Quez Watkins was extremely underrated. He was leading the league in yards per reception. He was a monster in the screen game. He was making explosive plays down the field, contested catches as well. Quez, for the first month of the season, was on like a 900-yard pace when the Eagles were actually throwing the football. And then again, he lost his screen role really because of Reagor and because of the added addition of running attempts throughout the year. They ran more than any team in the NFL last year. And again, they weren't even really running the first half of the season. So it shows you how dramatically things changed in the second half. And Quez still almost had 700 receiving yards, still was a big piece of the puzzle in that playoff run. I thought he was very reliable still in games. Should have had a monster game in the playoffs if Jalen Hurts could have found him. He should have had a lot more yards in that way too, because Jalen missed a lot of open looks for Quez down the field. So I think he's extremely underrated. I think if Quez Watkins is your 4th, 5th, maybe 6th passing target in your offense, one of the, to me, the most explosive players in the NFL. Again, a guy that's going to be consistently at the top of the league in yards per reception, even when the volume increases. Extremely underrated player that, again, I'm glad they brought in A.J. Brown, but I would have been more comfortable than most with Quez as your second best wide receiver on the outside. And then Josh Sweat is my other underrated player for 2022. And not really because people don't know about Josh Sweat. The Eagles gave him a contract extension last year. He led the Eagles in sacks with 7.5, a career high for Josh in that year where he got the extension, year number 4 of his career. but I think he's a little underrated just because I think there's more to be. I think there's another step where he can get into double-digit sacks this year, especially when he doesn't have to carry the load like he did last year. When Brandon Graham went down and Derek Barnett wasn't doing anything, Sweat was your only really reliable pass rusher on the outside. Like, it was pretty barren at defensive end last year. And so this year, you add Hassan Riddick, you add, Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean on that front seven. Derek Barnett comes back. Brandon Graham's coming off that torn Achilles. There's a lot of names that we are discussing. Fletcher Cox coming back on that one-year deal. Javon Hargrave coming off a career season. The NFL, or the Eagles defensive line across the NFL, this is one of the deeper units. And although Josh Sweat was your best player last year, I do think right now there's a lot of other players getting talked about more than Josh. And, I think that there is another depth that Sweat can have this year. I think both of those players, Quez Watkins and Josh Sweat, are really going to benefit from the additions the Eagles made this year of specifically A.J. Brown and Hassan Riddick, because it's going to take some of the attention away. Those two won't have to carry the load as much as they did in 2022. And speaking of those two players, the key additions of the 2022 season, this offseason, I mean, there's a lot of them. I think Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean are going to be some of the heartbeats of your defense for the next, hopefully, decade of the Eagles football. But to me, the two biggest impact additions for this season, because Jordan Davis, again, is going to be in a pretty big rotation, defensive tackle, 4 deep with Hargraves, Cox, and Milton Williams as well. Nakobe Dean, to me, is going to be a starter, but you got Kazir White there. You got Davion Taylor, TJ Edwards. The key additions are the stars you added this offseason through trades and through free agency. It is A.J. Brown and Hassan Riddick. Like, when you think about it, the Eagles added 2 players under the age of, 26? A.J. Brown's 24. I forget Riddick. I think he's 26, 25, in that range. 2 players in their prime, young players, locked up now on 3+ year deals. Riddick on a 3-year deal, Brown on a 4. And they're 2 of the most productive players of their positions the last 3 seasons. Hassan Riddick has more sacks than pretty much everybody outside of TJ Watt the last 2 years. The most productive edge rusher, I think, in the NFC, outside of Chandler Jones. Of course, Chandler Jones has been at the top in the sack total. But Hassan Riddick the last 2 years, one of the best, easily, edge rushers in the NFL. And A.J. Brown has been one of the best wide receivers, and that was despite being in an offense in Tennessee where it was all about Derrick Henry in the run game. So you add those 2 players for 2022, they're by far going to make the biggest impact for this football team. And I think they're going to be the difference in making this team a wild card contender versus a division contender. Hopefully, with Jalen Hurts also taking a leap, going to be the biggest addition, hopefully, this season. But A.J. Brown and Hassan Riddick are going to make the biggest impact, I think, by far in 2022. I want to get into 3 more questions that were being asked on Eagles Twitter. Coming up next, it's the make or break season. Who needs the biggest year in 2022? Who could surprise the most? And then who makes the biggest leap? That's coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. But guys, first, another shout out to one of our sponsors. It's a protein bar that tastes way more like a candy bar. It's Built Bar. Summer's coming, and with summer, you're going to need some food on the go. Built Bars are perfect to take with you on family vacations. Throw them in your bags and your kids' backpacks. Make sure that everybody has a bar so you're refueled for your summer adventures. The best part about Built Bars, they're healthy and they have the same flavor of a candy bar. It's all of the flavor and none of the guilt. 130 calories in most Built Bars, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. So replace your Reese's Cup, your Hershey's Bar, Nestle's Crunch, whatever it is, the sweet tooth of your craving. Make sure you replace it with a Built Bar. So many awesome flavors, too. You got banana cream pie, raspberry, double chocolate, peanut butter, white chocolate cookies and cream. Something for every taste bud. And they also have Built Puffs. These are the first ever marshmallow infused protein bars. You got flavors as well in that category, like banana cream pie and cinnamon churro. Make sure you head over to built.com and get an order of these incredible protein bars at Built Bar and use the promo code LOCKED15. It's LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your order. Once again, head over to built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. All right, Eagles fans, welcome back into this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles. Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Getting into today, 6 questions that I saw being asked on Eagles Twitter that I thought it was an interesting exercise to participate in now that we kind of know pretty much what the Eagles roster is going to look like in 2022 outside of, hopefully a few defensive back additions that Howie can make like he did with Steven Nelson last year later in the spring heading into the summer, because they need some help right now pretty badly on the second and third level, more of the third level with cornerback and safety. And they're going to need, some of these young guys to step up if they don't make any key additions. And so that leads us into these next 3 questions. And the first one is the make or break players for 2022. The Eagles that need the biggest seasons to make sure they cement themselves as long-term pieces. And my 2 make or break players are Davion Taylor and Quez Wallace. Day 2 and day 3 2020 draft picks that the Eagles envisioned becoming, I think, big pieces. Davion Taylor was seen as somebody with the most upside at the linebacker position, some of the most upside when it comes to day 2 options, seemed like maybe a stretch of a 3rd round pick, but everybody knew the traits. And it's why the Eagles took him a little higher than most would have projected. And then Quez Wallace was a do-it-all safety at Clemson that a lot of people projected more as like a 2nd round pick rather than a 4th. Neither one has been able to stay healthy. Taylor showed some flashes last year. Wallace did not. So maybe it's really tough to answer what these 2 guys are going to do, because again, with Wallace, he's just been too hurt to really even see what he can do. And then with Taylor, it's kind of the same thing. He did make some steps last year, but then the Eagles added in 2 players much like him and more productive in Kazir White and Nakobe Dean, who are, to me, going to be easily your 2 pretty much every down linebackers that are going to lead this team in snaps over the guys last year that did that with Edwards and Taylor. So it's like, can Taylor maybe beat out Kazir White? Can he stay healthy and show the progress he was making last year so the Eagles don't feel the need to give Kazir White a contract extension since he is only on that 1-year deal? It's going to be tough, though, to show that, because I don't know if there's a way that him and, TJ Edwards as well can really beat out Nakobe Dean and Kazir White for those top 2 inside linebacker spots if they're healthy. But it is a make or break season, because if Davion Taylor doesn't find a way, though, to do that, the Eagles are going to commit, I think, long-term to White and Dean. One of them for sure, and maybe both. Unless Davion Taylor gives them a reason to, again, feel the need, I think more so with White than Dean, to not give him a contract extension. And with Wallace, it's tough because, again, you don't want to rely on him. But at the same time, at safety, like, he at least, unlike Taylor, has a pretty big window of opportunity. Right now, the only guys in front of him are Anthony Harris and Marcus Epps. And while Marcus Epps right now is projected to be one of the 2 starters, somebody that I think the Eagles like more right now than Wallace, Wallace was the higher draft pick. He was the better college player. I think he was the better overall talent. And in 3 safety packages, Wallace is going to be on the football field. And it's not like they are married to Marcus Epps. Like, if Quez Wallace has a great summer and he looks really good maybe early in the season, like, he can beat out Epps for snaps. It's not like Marcus Epps is entrenched right now as your 17-game starter and there's no budging there. Like, I think Davion Taylor is easily the better player right now between these 2 2020 picks, but Wallace has the better opportunity. Either way, both of them are in make or break seasons. So they have to get it done this year if they want to create even just a sub-package role for themselves on this defense long term. I saw a lot of listeners on Twitter, they were choosing Miles Sanders for the make or break player. But for me, the issue with Miles Sanders is I think either outcome could still lead to both scenarios when it comes to him walking this year in free agency or getting a contract extension. Maybe you could say he needs to stay healthy this year and really break out to get that next deal. But I don't know, because again, if he stays healthy and has the breakout year, I could still see the Eagles letting him walk and not paying him or giving him the extension. Or if he kind of does what he's been doing the last few years, where he's always good when he plays, but he deals with nagging injuries a lot, I could still see the Eagles re-signing him on a team-friendly deal or letting him walk. So I'm not really sure for Miles Sanders that the 2022 season is necessarily make or break. So that's why I would lean more with 2 players on defense from the 2020 draft and Davion Taylor at linebacker, and Kayvon Wallace, the safety, heading into this season. Two more questions here. Who's going to be the surprise player of 2022? It's actually a guy I was just talking about. I think the player with the best chance is going to be Marcus Epps. I think Marcus Epps, again, the Eagles did not draft Kyle Hamilton in the draft. They had the opportunity. They took Jordan Davis instead. There was a safety run in the second round early, so Jalen Petrie went. Jaquan Brisker was off the board. Lewis Cine and Daxton Hill were the final two picks of the first round. So there just wasn't anybody at safety worth that 51st overall selection. So they took Cam Jurgens instead. And so they brought back Anthony Harris in free agency, but they missed out on Marcus Williams. Marcus Epps, they didn't bring back Rodney McLeod. So boom, suddenly Marcus Epps is your second best safety or second starter, and he might be better than Anthony Harris. I think he was better than Harris last year. He was probably, PFF, according to PFF, he was your most efficient safety of the three, Harris, McLeod, and Epps, and he was one of the better run-stopping safeties in the NFL last year. The Eagles like him. He's young. I think a lot of people early on, including myself, did not like him because he was forced onto the field in 2019, and Jim Schwartz is having him one-on-one against DK Metcalf with the drive of the season in the wild card round, and he gets totally mossed. So Marcus Epps kind of got a bad rap early on, but I will say last year he looked pretty good when he was out there. Again, it was in limited opportunities. I'm not sure if he's somebody you want to be a top two safety long-term in the modern day NFL. I think I want more at that position, but he's going to have the opportunity to show that he can be more. And like I said, it's a make or break season for Kayvon Wallace, but Wallace is on the outside looking in, where Epps right now has shown more than Wallace. Like, again, Wallace was the pick in the draft. He was a better college talent, but Epps has stayed healthy. He's been available. He's been better. And a lot of Eagles right now are talking about keep an eye on Marcus Epps. Like Darius Slay himself said Epps by name in the press conference as somebody to keep an eye out for in the secondary this year, as somebody that could take a step. So I think when it comes to like who could be the biggest surprise, like maybe somebody I'm not expecting to be great, but could really be a good player this year out of nowhere, it's probably Marcus Epps. Again, like who would even be the other candidates really? I'm not sure there's another guy, for that category, unless suddenly Derek Barnett blew up, or like Zach McPherson takes a huge step as your CB2. I think Marcus Epps is easily the top candidate for that question, the biggest surprise of 2022. All right, our final one here. Who makes the biggest leap in 2022? So Marcus Epps could be the biggest surprise based on a leap he takes, but who takes the biggest step forward from last year to this year? I don't think that's going to be Marcus Epps. And guys, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen Hurts is going to take a step this year. I think he's going to be a better football player, a better quarterback, a better passer in 2022 than he was in 2021. It'd be really hard not to, with the additions this Eagles team made on offense, specifically with A.J. Brown. But it's also because of this guy who's going to make the bigger leap that's going to help Jalen take another step, and it's DeVonta Smith. And again, kind of like Quez Watkins, you talk about, okay, where's the opportunities? Isn't it going to be reduced in 2022 compared to 2021 because you did add A.J. Brown? You want to get Dallas Goedert the ball more. They're still going to be running the football a lot. Like, why would DeVonta be the one that takes the biggest leap since he already was nearly a 1,000-yard receiver in his rookie year? Well, to me, I just think there's more meat on the bones. There's way more meat on the bones. And yeah, you add A.J. Brown, but again, they should be throwing the football more this year. So that should even out. And A.J. Brown's going to help take the attention off DeVonta Smith, where he's not going to be bracketed in coverage as much as he was last season. So I think Brown's presence is going to be a positive for DeVonta. And again, if you throw the football enough, and if your quarterback's good enough, there's room for 2,000-yard receivers on your football team. Look at the Cincinnati Bengals last year. T. Higgins had over 1,000 yards. Jamar Chase had over 1,000 yards. Tyler Boyd was sniffing at 900 yards receiving. There is enough to go around as long as you're not the top rushing team in the NFL. And DeVonta's should be your maybe still number one target over A.J. Brown, but it's 1A, 1B with Smith and Brown. I think there is so much more for Smith. And it's not like last year he's making the leap from like how he's developing. I think he could have had this leap last year if he was simply targeted more. If he gets those opportunities this year, again, he already had 916 yards last year, the most for a rookie receiver in Eagles history, with again, very limited opportunities. So this year, I think he's going to blow up. I think he should have at least 1,100 receiving yards. And I think at the end of the season, like right now, everybody's talking about A.J. Brown being, your top receiver, right? He's wide receiver 1, DeVonta's wide receiver 2. I'm not so sure. Like right now, to me, it's more 1A, 1B. And I wouldn't be surprised if DeVonta has better numbers than Brown next year. I think DeVonta Smith, again, and this is why it was bothering me this offseason when people were getting so frustrated the Eagles weren't landing receivers. Like, I wanted one too. Like, I definitely wanted to land Allen Robinson or Calvin Ridley, Robert Woods. I too thought this team needed a receiver, and I was over the moon when they traded for A.J. Brown. But again, I think some people were getting so frustrated that they didn't add specifically like a star top receiver before Brown. Whereas I was more like, yeah, I want a guy, but I don't need the guy, because I think we have the guy in DeVonta Smith. And so I think he's a star in the making, and I think you're going to see that in 2022. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Eagles. We'll be back tomorrow for another show, Wednesday as well. So too Thursday and Friday, a show 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, downloaded into your phone wherever you get the podcast. And make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And hit us up on Twitter at LockedOnBirds and at DiBiase, LOE. Would love for you guys to join in on this exercise. These 6 questions I thought were super interesting. Now that we know what the roster is set at for 2022. Hit us up again on Twitter at LockedOnBirds and at DiBiase, LOE. We've got the schedule coming out too this week. Still a lot to talk about in the world of the Philadelphia Eagles. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Now make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL podcast. All the news across the league in under 30 minutes, wherever you get your shows. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.